Yep.
So, welcome, Brittany, to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
You're welcome.
One thing that I think is really, like, a lot of people aren't super interested in that anymore, at least young adults growing up. And I don't know if that's because it's daunting, if it's because that's just not a culturally accepted thing anymore. But I kind of understand why you're so passionate about being a mom, why that has been something that, honestly, I'm reading and I think we'll get into this, has been a key highlight of your life and has led to these cool experiences that you probably didn't expect to embark on, but from what it sounds like, you're glad you have. So I guess that's my first question. Maybe that's a little broad, but what really interests in you being a mom, and what's that experience been like?
Well, of course, growing up, being a member of the church and thinking about families, like I always wanted to get married and have kids. And then it happens, and then life happens. And so, motherhood was always a goal of mine. I always wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, which I did have the honor of doing for about 11 years before I went back to work.
Yeah.
But, you just get so much fulfillment in seeing your kids succeed and raising them and loving them. Certainly my motherhood journey has not been typical, which I have a youngest that has pretty profound disabilities. So she's taught me a lot, and the experiences I've had in motherhood have actually led me to a career I never thought I would be doing.
Mm-hmm.
But, just being a mom is such an honor, and you're right, society undervalues it. But for me, I think it's an asset, and actually it was a criteria for my new job that they wanted. So I don't think everybody sees it as a detriment. But you're right, more and more people are putting off motherhood. But for me, that's my most important job. And when I introduce myself, I say, my most important job in the world is being a mom to these 3 girls. The rest of the stuff is just, stuff that I get to do.
Yeah.
So.
And you mentioned that you have, one of your children has a disability that, kind of came out of blue. What's that like?
When you venture into parenthood, you never think it's going to be you. You don't.
Right.
And I remember, in fact, when my oldest, Juliet, when I was pregnant with her, I failed a blood test. They have this screening blood test for certain disabilities, and it's not very accurate, but sometimes it can be.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was in my 20s. I was young, newly married, and when I failed that, it terrified me because, you don't think it's going to be you.
What was that blood test?
It's called a triple screen. I'm sure it's called something different now because she's, 18. But it can screen for different things like Down syndrome and other diagnoses. But it has a high false positive rate. But at the time, all I heard was Down syndrome, and I was terrified. And for like 3 weeks, we thought our sweet baby was going to have a disability. And in fact, she didn't, and all was well. But that was kind of my first scare. And so to be honest, I kind of always wondered, is that something that's going to happen to us?
Mm-hmm.
And then when Brooke, so I have 3 girls, but when Brooke was diagnosed as a baby, it shakes your faith. It rocks your world. I mean, it was a huge trial. I mean, she was 5 weeks old. We were at a holiday event with our 4-year-old and 2-year-old and 5-week-old at the time. And I was in the back. My husband was taking my girls to see Santa. And I noticed Brooke started having some odd kind of abnormal movements. But you know how babies are. They have like funny little gestures.
Right.
And so at first I didn't think anything of it. But then I noticed it started to become repetitive. And that mother's intuition kicked in. And I'm like, this is not normal.
Right.
And so on the way home from that event, I called the after-hours line at our pediatrician's office. And the nurse tried not to scare me, but she's like, I think your daughter's having seizures. You need to take her to Phoenix Children's. And, of course, we were terrified. At the time, the only thing I knew about epilepsy is what you see on TV. And to think about my 5-week-old baby having seizures was really scary. And to make a long story short, we had hospital admission, all kinds of tests, whirlwind diagnosis. It was hard. We went home on Christmas Eve with a baby with a life-limiting condition, and everything changed. But, we didn't stay there. Thankfully, that place of despair and just what are we going to do?
Yeah.
We have faith, and we had a good support system, and we have a great medical team, and you just do what you have to do because you love your kids. Mm-hmm. And so we've just learned a lot from her and had a lot of experiences over the years, but I would never change it. I mean, I don't want her to have to struggle, but she's been such a blessing to our family and taught us about what's really important.
Yeah. When you first found out about her, as you call it, life-limiting, disability, and you mentioned that it kind of was scary. It was nerve-wracking. I can't imagine, I haven't had any kids myself, but I can only imagine like that would be like, wow, like what do you do next? And so what did you do to kind of go from the concern, the worry to, okay, how do we move forward?
Yeah. So I remember specifically, being at Phoenix Children's and looking out across the valley and just seeing like all the holiday lights and just like, I'm going to admit, feeling bitter. Like here we are finding out our baby may not live. And then all our friends and family, which they deserve to, were celebrating the holidays. But you couldn't help but feel sorry for ourselves. But you just do it. Like I said, you do what you have to do because you love your kids and we love her. And we learned how to take care of her. So immediately, the hospital staff taught us how to manage her oxygen and get trained in all her different interventions. Thankfully, Arizona, we live in a state where there are good disability services. Mm-hmm. So she was connected to something called the Arizona Early Intervention Program really early on, where she started therapies like at 8 weeks old. And so I think just knowing like, okay, like this is hard, but we're not alone. Really good family and friend support system. And she just was this tough little cookie. So we're like, if she's going to be resilient and brave, like we have to be too. And she really does beat the odds. Like we're lucky we still have her. Her diagnosis is called Aicardi syndrome. It's like, that's the main part of it. But accompanies that is cerebral palsy and epilepsy and things. And it sounds really doom and gloom if you were going to look it up. But you've met her. She's sweet and happy. And I've just had the mindset, me and my husband, like if she has to face this life with a smile, like we do too. I mean, I'm not going to lie. There's been a lot of tears and heartache, but it's mostly been an honor to be her mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's like, is it her condition? Is it pretty, and what's her condition called again?
It's called Aicardi, AICARDI syndrome. It's really rare, a couple thousand cases worldwide, mostly affects little girls. It was such a shock.
Yeah.
I did definitely not expect that.
Is it like typical for them to live past their through the condition, or how's that typically work?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. It's a tough question, but it's good to be real, right? Yeah. So, we're lucky she's still here. So the median age for Aicardi syndrome is 8 years old for mortality. Yeah, and she's almost 15. So, she's beating the odds. And I think a lot of that has to do with she's just a tough little spirit, but also, medical interventions get better. She's had some surgeries. She has an epileptologist who's really skilled in treating her. But most likely we won't have her much into adulthood, but you can't dwell there, right? Like if you did, I'd be depressed all the time. So we just keep moving forward. But her main doctor calls her his miracle patient because she keeps just like proving him wrong all the time. But that's a good thing. So
no, and thanks for I think there's a lot of people who just don't understand anything about disabilities and these type of conditions, and when you mention that she's a miracle, I think that's really cool to hear. Is that how she kind of brings a smile? And I have, in meeting her, I think that's absolutely true. She's always smiling and having a good time, and so it was neat to meet her. I think I met her a few times, but it was really neat to meet her. In your position now, because now you're working at the Epilepsy Foundation of Arizona and New Mexico. Is that for both states?
Correct.
What's that been like? What's that journey been like getting into that? Obviously, it stems from, Brookie and being involved in that, in her, growing up. But what's that been like? How'd you get involved in that? Because I think a lot of people, and I wanted to start with that first question, because I think a lot of parents and people who have a hard situation kind of come at them, sometimes get bitter and run away from it, or and that's not been the case. And so I'm curious to hear your story, how you got involved in it more.
Sure. So it's kind of a long one, so I'll try not to go on and on.
That's all good.
And I just have to preface, there have been times where I've been bitter and sad, and grief's a cycle. So, and anytime she has a missed milestone, it hurts, right?
Yeah.
I wish she was in junior high and on the sports team or doing dance and had friends and had that typical life, but that's not her life. And so you kind of have to make a choice. And so when she was little, like I said, I was a stay-at-home mom for a long time, and I'm grateful I was able to. And so I had all these little girls, and we spent a lot of time at Phoenix Children's. I mean, we've had hundreds of days in the hospital. I couldn't even tell you how many. But I always just kind of had that advocate personality. And her pediatrician was like, why don't you apply to be on the Family Advisory Council here? It's an advocacy council for parents. And I'm like, it's like applying for a job. You have to get a background check and go through an interview, and they carefully pick candidates. And I hadn't worked in a long time, so I'm like, I have like nothing to put on my resume. Like, what are they going to, But they ended up choosing me, and I've been on it for over 10 years. That's kind of what started my journey into volunteering and advocacy, which led to my job. And so it was really healing for me, though. So, working on a council with other parents who have kids with serious conditions, not only did I build friendships and meet people who get my life, that was honestly probably the most valuable part. But I also got to and get to serve on a council with Phoenix Children's physicians and staff and make positive change at the hospital for families. So I always tell people, I use all these medical mom skills I never thought I would have to learn, that I never wanted to learn, but I can use it to do some good. So I started with that. And then from that, I just decided, I really like volunteering. And at the time, I thankfully didn't have to work. But I also heard of another organization called Raising Special Kids, and they give guidance to families on state services and special education. And so they assisted me. And so I got involved with them, ended up volunteering at the same time at Phoenix Children's and then with Raising Special Kids for about 5 years. And at that point, Raising Special Kids offered me a job. Oh, cool. And again, I was kind of like, and I'll be candid, I don't have a college degree. I was like, I've been a stay-at-home mom. What am I supposed to put on my resume? It was a little intimidating, but they really valued the parent experience. And they said, some of these qualities you have or you can't teach. It's just life experience, but the rest of the stuff we can. And so they took a chance and hired me. And I was so honored to be on staff with them for 5 years, doing family support. I also was on communications, so I helped with their social media, any sort of communication platform. And it was really good to develop my communication skills and confidence and just getting knowledge of all of our state systems and helping parents. Well, I'm telling you all this because it leads to the job I have now.
That's good.
So I was doing that, and I had speaking opportunities. And so Phoenix Children's has a neurology symposium every year. And the director of pediatric neurology, Dr. Angus Wilfong, I had served with him on a committee, and he's like, Brittany, will you come share your story? It'll be really impactful for these doctors to hear from a parent. Sometimes they get so clinical and these conferences are really research-based, and you kind of forget who you're really serving, So he's like, let's have a parent story as a highlight. And so
that's cool.
It was really neat. It's probably one of my biggest honors that I've had in my career is getting to speak at that. And so that was at Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix. And that was last spring. And so I got to just share my story and, just be real about our journey, what's helped us, how physicians can support families. And from that experience, this particular physician, Dr. Wilfong, he kind of started getting me involved with things. Epilepsy Foundation, where I work now, I've been supported by them as a parent. My daughter has intractable seizures, so we've utilized them for resources for school help. In school, you can have like seizure plans so the school staff knows what to do.
Are there a lot of different types of seizures?
Yes.
Okay.
Many. I couldn't even tell you all of them, to be honest, because there's so many types. But Brooke has 3 different types. So many different seizure types. And so, I had been supported by them, information resources, and they have a helpline. And so they were, we were involved. But one day I got a phone call a few months after that symposium presentation I did. It was on a Sunday, which is not normal for a PCH doc to be calling you on a Sunday on their day off through the patient portal. And they're like, can you please call me? I have an opportunity I want to share with you. And I thought it was speaking again, like, share my story. And this neurologist was like, do you want to apply for the executive director position for Epilepsy Foundation? And I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, I'm not qualified enough to do that. But it was super flattering. And he assured me, yes, I am. We really have been mindful on who we want in this role. My predecessor is amazing. She got promoted within the national office, and they had been looking for months for a candidate. But I was a little intimidated because
Sure.
that's a leadership position. I looked up the job on LinkedIn and I'm like, okay, on paper, I don't have all these qualifications,
Right.
but Dr. Wolfong's like, yes, you do. And Brooke's neurologist is like, you need to do this. We think you're a great candidate. I ended up applying for the job, and the national office took a chance on me and offered it to me in February, and I started, and it's been like a whirlwind in a good way ever
Yeah.
since.
What's been the main responsibilities of that role? And there's probably quite a few
Yeah.
inside of it.
So in Arizona, there's about 77,000 people on average that have epilepsy.
Okay.
And so Epilepsy Foundation of America is, we're in every state. In fact, there's Epilepsy Foundation across the world.
Sure.
And so in Arizona and New Mexico, that's my region, we're a chapter together. So
Right.
it's like we're a section. And so our responsibility, and I think in New Mexico the statistic I read, there was like 15,000. They have less population than Arizona. But our responsibility is support. So like if a family or an individual is diagnosed with epilepsy, they can call us.
Sure.
What do I do? Who do I talk to? What state programs can I apply for? We honestly get a lot of mental health calls. Like, I'm really struggling with this diagnosis. What should I do? So there's a crisis.
And that's from like parents and different people who are working with someone who has epilepsy, or them having epilepsy and having
both.
Oh, both. Okay.
Yeah. Because think about it. Not everyone with epilepsy is like my daughter. Some are like you or me. Like, we're functioning adults, but we have this diagnosis that in some ways I think it's almost harder because Brooke, she's really profoundly intellectually disabled. She's like a, sweet little innocent person that has these seizures where if it were one of my other kids, they're trying to get a job or go to school and they have epilepsy, it can be hard wanting to do these things, but having this chronic illness that society doesn't always understand.
Yeah.
So we serve adults with epilepsy, kids, families, everything. So we provide resources and support. We do community events. What I'm busy right now doing is every summer we do a camp called Camp Candlelight. It's for kids with epilepsy, and we take them up to Payson for a week and put on a full-on fun summer camp.
That's cool.
Yeah, so that's occupying a lot of my time right now. That's in June.
And that's through the foundation. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's amazing. And we have really generous sponsors that make it possible for our the kids to go. We do a walk every year. In fact, Arizona's walk is the biggest in the country.
Really?
It's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
We do support groups. So just all kinds of like I would say resources, support, community. Those are kind of our areas. But always looking for new opportunities. Being a parent, I have that hat. So like I'm connected with other epilepsy parents that want more in-person events now that COVID's calmed down.
Right.
So we're going to start doing like meetups and things for families because it can be isolating.
Yeah.
And then we really strive hard to build relationships with all of our epilepsy centers. So the physicians at, Barrow, Banner, Mayo, Phoenix Children's, U of A, we do things with them and build partnerships and help their patients. Yeah. So, yeah.
Is epilepsy something that is on the increase, or has it kind of stayed the same, or is it? I wish I knew more about epilepsy. I just don't. But
I don't know. Actually, that's a good question. I mean, I think obviously diagnostics is better and better as medical technology advances. It is one of the most common neurological conditions that's the least funded research-wise.
Really?
So it's very common. Yet there's such a stigma around it. Basically, for a layperson, having epilepsy is kind of like having an electrical storm in your brain. Like all this brain electricity is misfiring and it causes symptoms. And depending on what area of your brain it's from, it depends on, how it affects you.
Right.
And I remember when my kids were little, the child life specialist at the hospital was trying to explain Brooke's diagnosis to Juliet and Audrey, who were 4 and 2. And they were, she was like, well, think about like a thunderstorm and your sister's having lightning going off in her brain. And they were like, whoa, that's so cool. Because they're little.
Yeah.
But it's true. That's a good explanation. And so there's just more and more. I mean, some seizures are half a second where a person it's called an absent seizure, where they're kind of with it and they're not with it. Some seizures are like 20 minutes long, convulsions, like what you would picture. Some seizures, they're focal aware seizures where like part of your body is seizing and you know it, but you can't control it because it's something in your brain.
Right.
So I don't really know if it's on the rise, but it's very common, yet people don't talk about it.
Yeah. Do you know what the stigma is behind it? Is it it's just kind of a weird thing that goes on so people don't want to talk about it? Or
I think people are afraid because it has created barriers. Like people don't want to give jobs to people that have seizures.
Oh, really?
They don't know how to handle it. Or, for so long, and this is, if you want to rub an epilepsy mom the wrong way, you call them like spells. It's a little spell. They're just having a spell. No, there's actually like an electrical thing going on in their brain.
Right.
So I think, in years past, people thought it was, they're not paying attention, or, there's something wrong with them, or in some cultures, their family did something wrong, and so now their child has this. And that still goes on today in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
But there's even like celebrities who their children have had seizures and they won't talk about it, which that's one of our campaigns is Break the Stigma.
Right.
It's one of our hashtags and campaigns we do because it's actually very common. And if more people were aware of it, there would be less stigma. And I hate to get on my soapbox, but it's such a...
No, please do.
It's so important. And we actually, something big we do is we do seizure recognition and first aid training for free.
Yeah.
So I'm an instructor. So we will go to any organization, any entity, and train them on how to help someone with seizures. Just like a CPR certification, there's seizure first aid certification. And there's a law in Arizona that was passed a few years ago called Seizure Safe Schools. And it's passed in about half of the states in the U.S., and basically, if a student in Arizona, for our particular state, has epilepsy, they submit a plan to the school, basically says, like, this is what you do in the event of a seizure. Their doctor works with them and signs off on it.
Yeah.
If they have one on record, then the school legally has to have the school nurse and at least one other staff member go through our seizure first aid training. So that way they know how to help students. Because for so long, they wouldn't know what to do, and then they'd call 911.
Yeah.
And which sometimes that's needed, but sometimes it's not. I mean, when Brooke was in, like, kindergarten, she had a grand mal seizure, which is what you would think a seizure is. Super scary.
It's kind of the one that, like, everything seizes up, right?
Yeah, and, like, convulsions, on the bus. And the aide was, like, freaking out. Well, after that, the school's like, yeah, of course we'll provide a nurse for her, because they were scared.
Yeah.
And so just providing that education just will help people with epilepsy feel like they can be included in society. I mean, I talk to young adults that have seizures and they don't have a social life because they're afraid, like, well, what if I'm at a young adult activity or bar or whatever and I have a seizure? Like, what, people are going to think I'm weird or they're not going to know what to do. So it can be really isolating too.
Right.
So there's a complex dynamic that goes on, but we just really want people to feel supported. And since I'm touched by it personally, it's easy to be passionate about it.
Right. No, that makes sense. In the little bit of work I did with, I think one person I worked with in my mission had epilepsy. He had a mix of, I think he had the grand mal, is that what it's called? Mm-hmm. And then he had like audible seizures or something like that, where like he'd hear things. I'm not familiar with the specifics, but that was kind of what he had mentioned to me. But one thing that was really cool to me in working with the variety of special needs and circumstances was they have a lot to offer and a lot to give and a lot they can do. People just kind of oftentimes think that they can't.
Yeah.
And it was cool working with them and seeing, in the mission at least, I actually felt like sometimes I learned more from the missionaries with these kind of unique circumstances than I ever did from the missionaries who didn't have those unique circumstances. And so that was really cool to see. I remember one person coming to me one day, and it was he was like a general authority, actually came and visited, and he asked he brought all the, I guess they called them transfer missionaries at the time, and they were the ones that came home early from proselyting. And he asked me, he said, because I think he was trying to gauge the stigma of service missions versus proselyte missions because they were doing this merge. And he asked the room, he said, how many of you are uncomfortable serving with missionaries with special needs?
Yeah.
And no one raised their hand except I did. And then I looked around and I saw that no one else raised their hand. And so that was a little awkward. Yeah. But the reason I raised my hand was because it wasn't because I didn't felt uncomfortable working with them. I thought he was asking in a sense of I'd never worked with special needs missionaries. And so I was uncomfortable in the situation of knowing, how do you deal with a missionary who has a special need, or how do you, work with someone who has special needs? And that's why I was uncomfortable. And I thought that's what he was asking. I I don't know why more missionaries didn't raise their hand, but that's okay.
Yeah.
But that was the thing that was really eye-opening to me, is as I got more comfortable with the missionaries who had these special needs and circumstances, I realized, I was like, oh, wow, they have way more to offer than people give them credit for. And that probably comes down to a lot of what you're saying with just educating people on their needs and their circumstances. What's been like maybe your biggest takeaway thus far? And I'd like, and let's kind of split up. In your first position working with the Arizona, remind me of their name.
Raising Special Kids.
Yes.
Yeah.
What was kind of your biggest takeaway there? And then what's been maybe the biggest takeaways in the few months that you've been working at the Epilepsy Foundation?
Oh gosh, that's so hard because both are so fulfilling. In fact, I would do either job for free. It's just nice to get paid, so don't tell my boss or send him this clip.
Yeah.
But working for Raising Special Kids, you serve people with all needs. So anything from autism, cerebral palsy, ADHD, anxiety, and everything in between. So it's any disability or special health care need. I think, biggest takeaway is hard. From a parent, so many parents just want their kids to be included and treated just normal. I mean, it sounds like common sense, but you would be surprised, Matt, on people are even afraid to greet Brooke. I'm
Really?
like, I get it. The wheelchair and her needs are intimidating, but at the end of the day, she's a happy 14-year-old girl. Even if she can't respond to you in the same way that you and I would,
Right.
She'll light up and be happy. And I think that my kids are used to it. That's one of the wonderful benefits of having a sibling with disability that you can't ever recreate is my older two are so much more comfortable with people with different needs because they've grown up with her, and it creates a wisdom you can't replicate otherwise. But I think the biggest takeaway is, it's just having a disability isn't who you are. It's part of your life.
Right.
And so Brooke is an amazing 14-year-old girl who likes nature and swimming, the color blue, the movie Frozen, literally will not let it go. But she also happens to have a huge list of diagnoses. And I think for parents of any diagnosis or the missionaries you served with or whatever, they don't want to be known by that special need. They want to be known by who they are. And, we all have challenges, right? We all have trials that God has given us, and we have to overcome them. I would hate if the only thing I was known by was something that was physically wrong with me.
Yeah.
And so now, and it's just so fulfilling. I mean, those kids have, not to get too spiritual, but they have sweet spirits about them. It's really strengthened my testimony of what's after this life and why everything, why things happen. And, you can either be bitter or get better. We decided to get better. And so that's been just serving this community. I've had so many tender mercies and experiences that I'll never, ever regret. For the Epilepsy Foundation, I'm just so honored. I'm still kind of I can't believe I have this job. But just being able to connect with a community I care so much about. I mean, I'm very lucky and I work from home. I go out into the community for meetings and events, but just being able to turn a passion of mine into a career and to be able to, help support my family is such an honor. And it's the same thing, as far as my takeaway in this epilepsy community, people just want to be valued, and it seems so basic, but it's not. It's hard for society to understand differences, and I'll just always be an advocate for those that struggle and, people that are neurodiverse or that have a condition. If you take a chance to get to know them, it will change your life. And I've had so many unique experiences and met people I never would have met because of her. And then the trajectory she's led me on and the jobs I've had. It's been pretty awesome.
Yeah. What you mentioned with this whole experience that it really boosted your testimony about, the next life and what that entails. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I'm not going to lie. I've certainly been mad at God before, when you see your child really struggling. And Brooks almost died. Not to be blunt, but we've had some scary experiences. And my kid, when she was younger, we called 911 all the time. Juliet Notary might not remember, but she's been resuscitated in front of them when they were younger, and it's scary.
Yeah.
And so there have been times where you're like, why is this happening to my family? Why is my little girl? The good news is I've never lost my testimony. I've just had times of, being upset or mad, but I have really realized Well, one of my least favorite sayings that members of the church use is God will not give you anything you can't handle. I do not like that because it's so not true.
Yeah.
He gives us lots of things we can't handle, but we don't handle them alone. And
Right.
so that has been, for me, where I felt the Spirit the most is when we've had our most significant struggles. I mean, being in the hospital and pleading for your child to live, I mean, you get you really close to God in those moments. And, you know, it's a work in progress. There's some times where you feel like, why does my child have to do this? But we wouldn't be able to get through what we've gotten through without having faith. And so it's always been important to me. I felt the Spirit too many times to ever deny it. And so we just keep on pushing through. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think that's really, you know, whether it's your experience or something else that maybe makes you question why, you know, why this, why that. I think that happens to everybody, you know, and that's, and something's going to come by and rattle you a little bit in life. If it doesn't happen, I guess either you're really lucky or you're not really living life. But yeah, I think you're right. It's like, how do you keep growing closer, you know, to the Lord? How do you make sure that you're not turning away, but turning towards Him? I think that's really the big thing. And I honestly wonder sometimes people who don't have maybe a religious background to fall on, you know, what do they lean against when when life gets tough?
In my medical community, respectfully, I think of parents that don't have faith, and I'm like, how depressing, because we know we won't have her forever. So, and in any life, everyone has challenges that are hard. They're just different, and I don't want to live without hope. So even though I can be mad at God sometimes or bitter about your circumstance, like I'd much rather live hoping in something than having nothing.
Yeah.
So.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned that engaging with other people, they get nervous around, you know, Brooke or even individuals who have special needs in general. What have you seen work the best at helping kind of break down that stigma? Because I'll be honest, I remember being like 12, 13 and going to, there was a facility down here. And I think they've stopped this now, but they kind of put all these kind of special needs individuals in one.
In Coolidge.
Yeah, in Coolidge.
Yeah, Randolph House.
Yeah, Randolph House.
I've been there.
And I remember going as a kid and being kind of uncomfortable because I just didn't know what to expect. So I think a lot of people feel that, but you're right. Like they're just people, and their circumstance doesn't define who they are. There's a lot of things about them, just like everybody. So what have you seen work the best at kind of breaking down that?
I just think acting normal. I mean, if you come to my house, you know, being around Brooke, it is intimidating sometimes, but it's okay to admit that. Like, I get it. I was not super comfortable around people with disabilities before I had my own, but I just think acting normal, you know, addressing them by name. It's okay to ask questions. In fact, parents love it when you ask questions. It's better because most of the time society ignores them. So I'm totally fine with people asking me about, you know, hey, you know, what is Brooke like? What is her diagnosis? Does she use language? I mean, I don't necessarily love it when some random person on the street asks me, like, how long is she going to live? Like, that's not great. It's happened before.
Right.
But I just think acting normal and just being yourself. And it's okay to admit you're a little nervous, but and don't treat them like a baby. Like, yes, cognitively, she is very delayed and probably is more developmentally on, you know, the toddler stage. But it's a dignity thing. You know, you don't want to treat someone who's a teenager it's like disrespectful. And so call them by name, you know, don't use words like, oh, that autistic child, like that's so-and-so, that's Jason or whatever. Or, you know, how many times she's been called the girl in the wheelchair. No, that's not her name. Her name's Brooke, you know. So it sounds like common sense. I'll tell you, adults usually have a harder time. Kids usually don't. They're like, oh, okay, this is Brookie. She has seizures. It's like electricity in her brain. Oh, that's so cool. But she likes playing with you guys. Okay. And then that's that. Adults seem the ones that are like, oh, I don't know how to act. I don't want to offend. Like, it's okay to make a mistake and just act normal and try to, and in the, you know, in the missionary setting, you know, some of those, you know, unique needs or disabilities end up being an asset because it invites compassion and things. So, I don't know if there's really any other tips than just acting like you would act to anyone else.
Yeah.
You know, if you met me, you would say, hey, Brittany, how are you? Even though Berkey can't respond or whoever, you know, having the dignity to pay attention to them and include them. Sadly, that little step does not happen very often. So it goes a long way.
Yeah. No, I think you brought up a good point with the missionaries too about it can be an asset. And one thing I noticed a lot was, I think in the world in general, people assume that others are not looking out for your best interest or trying to screw you over, whatever you want to call it. And that's not the case typically, at least what I found with people who have autism or seizures or Down syndrome or whatever it is, right? That's just not the case. You know, they usually have the purest intentions in heart. And so I think that's, why a lot of people, once they do get past that discomfort barrier, are more touched by them or will, open-minded. And that was one thing on the mission I saw a lot was just even in their testimonies. It may have not been the clearest. It may have not been the most understandable. But when they were sharing or they were verbalizing it as best they could, or even serving, you knew that it came from a pure place. And so it meant, I don't know if it meant more than when others did it, but it meant a lot, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah. Certainly feel the spirit when you're around people that are clean. I mean, I was joking my husband, this is totally making light of it, but I'm like, when we die and everything's said and done and Brooke goes to the celestial kingdom, I'm going to tell my Father, I really tried so hard being her mom. Let us come too, you know?
Yeah, no, for real.
She's perfect and innocent. And yes, I agree. We had a missionary in the last year, probably, service missionary who has autism for his testimony. And it was one of the most spiritual testimonies I've ever heard. It was just so sweet and pure and not complicated.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I do think our church has work to do, but we're getting there as far as being more inclusive.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I do think, and I think most of it stems from just the people of the church, which is, I think a lot of things when it comes to anything with the church is just the cultural organization versus, leadership of the church.
Very true.
Is what I've noticed.
Fear.
Yeah.
And not understanding.
Change. People like the kind of the way it's been done. And so when changes are made, it's the acceptance of it. I actually heard that the church, the leadership of the church said whenever they make a change, they expect adoption to take 10 years for it to really be adopted by the members. This is the timeline they run it by.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. So if they implement, they expect, that to be the clock they run on before people accept it. As a side note too, one thing that kind of my mom when she was pregnant, and once again I know zero about seizures or anything really,
okay.
But when she was pregnant, she had a lot of seizures.
Okay. And
for the life of me, I don't know why, but I don't know if it was stress induced. I don't know exactly how that works. Is that kind of a common thing or?
I don't know what's common, but, hormonal changes can cause seizures. And so that might have been, you're pregnant. That might have been, I don't know for sure. But your body's going under a lot of stress too, growing a baby. So it's probably a combination of things. Did they stop after she had?
Yeah. So she would have them during the pregnancy, but then after she hasn't had any. But from what I understand from what my dad said was when she had a couple seizures in one of her pregnancies, and then one time early on, she had a seizure one night, and he was like, "Let's go get you checked. I think you're pregnant again," and she was.
Interesting.
And so the one thing he said was that when she would have them, it was she would be really, really wound up and stressed leading up to it, and he could tell, and then she'd have this seizure, and it was when he'd ask her, "Are you feeling stressed? What about that thing you were worrying about the other day?" She was like, "I don't remember it. It doesn't matter. I don't care." So it was almost kind of it would wipe her mind of the stress and the worry, almost like a reset is what he said.
Yeah.
But granted, I think my mom mentioned that she feels sometimes her memory's not as good as it once was since then. And so I think it maybe affected her memory from that standpoint. But, that was, so I like I said, I don't know a lot about seizures, but that was something that I've always found kind of interesting how your brain works and how it relates to that and things like that. But
there's so much they don't know still, too. I mean, her epileptologist even says, like, I can say this, but there's so much we don't know. It's interesting you said, though, that she was, like, really wound up and agitated because there is something called an aura, which it's actually seizure activity, but, like, some people know it's coming. Like, they smell something weird, or they see blinking lights, or they have, like, a weird sensory thing, or they get agitated, and then it comes.
Yeah.
So it's like your brain is building, happens, and then they're really tired afterwards, like the release.
Yep.
So that's a thing.
Interesting. Yeah, you'd think it'd be. I'm surprised that it's not more funded or researched if it's such a.
I know.
An
that's
issue.
A whole other thing. I get. Yeah.
Do people just not want to fund it, or what's?
I mean, I don't know.
What do you think the reason is on
details on? I mean, Epilepsy Foundation, we do raise money for research, and we give research grants to many research centers around the country. Researching epilepsy, but I just know, and that's not part of my job, but
sure.
I know that hearing from our national office that if you think about other common conditions, Parkinson, not common, but other things you've heard of, Parkinson's, muscular sclerosis, Alzheimer's, they get way more funding, which they need it.
Right.
They need cures for those things, but epilepsy is way more common.
Right.
And there's less research support in that area, and so it's very interesting. I don't know the answer, but I know we wish it would change.
Right.
Yeah.
Do they have anything that solves seizures at this point?
There are some people that gain seizure freedom. There are.
Okay.
I mean, it depends on your epilepsy type. Some teenagers will have epilepsy, and I hate using the word grow out of it, but that's kind of what happens. Like they onset during teenage years, and then they don't have them anymore.
Interesting.
It depends on the type. I mean, some people, you can get brain surgery. So if they can target the area of your brain on an MRI or in an EEG in the hospital, and if there's a specific area, like we know the seizure's coming from that area, they can remove that part of the brain.
Oh.
Whether it's like an actual, not to get graphic, but craniotomy where they take it out, or there's innovations in laser surgery right now, which is really exciting, where literally they can laser that area, the child will go home the next day. Like, it's pretty insane. So it depends. And then some medications bring seizure freedom. So not everyone that has epilepsy has daily seizures.
Right.
There are some people that are quote unquote cured or have it really well managed.
Yeah. Huh. That's. Have you heard anything with like the Neuralink chips and things like that?
So there's obviously lots of medical technologies, and the neurologists on our board would laugh at me right now because I'm going to butcher how to explain it. But there is something called an RNS system where it's like an implant in your brain. They can input and it interrupts seizure activity. Mm-hmm. There's also something that Brooke actually has. It's called a vagus nerve stimulator. It looks like a pacemaker. It's like the size of an Oreo.
Yeah.
And they physically implant it in her chest near her vagus nerve.
Okay.
And kind of basically it sends a signal to your brain all day long, calm down, calm down, calm down.
Oh, I see.
And by doing that, it's really significantly reduced her 911 calls, her hospitalizations. So, and it's really crazy. Like, the neurologist can adjust it by putting this instrument to her chest right here and then going on the iPad and adjusting the settings.
Whoa.
So it's pretty cool.
That's cool. What's the vagus nerve? What's that do?
Oh gosh, it controls a lot of my daughter, who's the nursing anatomy expert, would be better to telling you, but it sends, it's a nerve that controls so much in your brain. I mean, people that have tachycardia episodes with the heart, if you stimulate the vagus nerve, it can reduce tachycardia. I don't know why it helps seizures, but it, by stimulating it, but it can. Mm-hmm. It's not 100% effective, but most people that have a VNS, it significantly reduces them.
I see. So it's just kind of disrupting the signal or at least calming the signal or some.
Yeah, and
sort.
there is some patients it works with, not my daughter, but if she started having a seizure, you take a magnet and you physically swipe the magnet over it and it can stop the seizure.
Wow.
For her, it doesn't work. Some people it does. But, there's always cool medical advancements that are up and coming. So.
Yeah, that is the interesting thing with, some of the technology they have, even mentioning the laser, because I would assume, doing any procedure on the brain is pretty risky.
Yeah.
Because I had a friend who had some seizures, but I think their concern was if they went in and tried to operate, sometimes you come out lacking some personality.
Yep,
and
the frontal lobe.
Yeah, so that can be kind of, I think that's probably a a hard choice for some people who that's an option, you know?
Oh, yeah. It's scary. Think about it. So the laser procedure is a lot less invasive.
Okay.
And in fact, the physician at Phoenix Children's who recruited me, he invented it, and he's renowned across the country. And like kids can literally, they can identify the area of the brain, like say it was right here, the seizures are coming on. They do a laser. The kid can go home the next day. It's like it's amazing. But
how are they cutting through? Are they going through the skull? And okay. And do they? I would assume with laser, they probably don't have to make a huge.
No, it's like a tiny little millimeter laser. I mean, I don't fully know how it works, but I've listened to a presentation on it, and it's awesome. And then it can change their life.
Pretty cool.
So yeah, so to be a candidate, they have to know where in the brain the seizures are coming from. Not everybody has that, but many do.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So a little bit of a change of topics. I'm curious because you mentioned you've kind of been on a fitness journey of late, especially, and I think that's cool because I think especially being a mom, being involved in these different organizations where you're busy, having a child who has special needs and you have to focus on her needs as well as having other children as well. I think a lot of parents feel like, man, how do I take care of myself? How do I take care of my own needs? And you've had a fitness journey. You talked about some of the hobbies you enjoy, running. I guess I don't know if the hobby is the right term, but running, hiking, and those different things. So what's worked for you? How's that fitness journey been? How are you feeling doing that fitness journey? Because I'm assuming it probably feels great to, do and achieve. And so what's that been like and how have you accomplished it?
So, as a mom, you always come last. And so it's really easy to neglect yourself and you're tired and, not to use Brooke as an excuse, but having a child with disability brings on a whole nother level of stress. And so when I was younger, I was really active. I did cheer in high school and college and liked going to the gym and stuff. But in my 30s, I just started having some chronic health conditions, and a lot of it was stress related.
Sure.
And then it's just like my health got away from me. Like I was never an overweight person, but all of a sudden, a few years ago, I woke up one day and I'm like, oh my gosh, like to be candid, like I can't believe I'm this heavy. What the heck? And I wasn't feeling good, and you just don't feel good about yourself. And so I remember in 2020 when COVID hit, I'm a social person, and so having to go from working, I was in an office a few days a week, and then being straight from home. I just started walking around my neighborhood, and that kind of started it, but I had been a runner before. So it was sort of like starting with walking. It's like, oh, I'm never going to get there. But I did that for a little while, but still progress was slow. And last December, I was honestly the heaviest I'd ever been. And I'm like, enough is enough. I feel gross. I'm not confident. I speak a lot at my job. I don't want to feel run down all the time. Yeah. And so I started working. A good friend of mine is a dietitian, and she'd helped me when I was younger, and I did some runs and stuff and advised me when she was in school. But now she, years later has a practice, and her name's Wendy. And I'm like, Wendy, like, we've got to start doing this. So I started working with her, and it's not really anything magic. It's not fad dieting. It's literally tracking my food in my Fitness Pal. I meet with her every week on Zoom. So now it's been a year and a half since then. So it wasn't last December. It was the December before. Yeah. But it's really just, watching my calories. She doesn't have me count macros really except protein. Like she made me have because women are notoriously low in protein. Yeah. And so she gave me a calorie goal, gave me a protein goal, and then just is like, okay, just start tracking your food. And slow and steady, but it stayed off. And so as you lose weight, you get more energy, and then you can exercise more. Right. So I went from running to I went from walking to intervals to now I can run around my neighborhood. I'm not fast, but I can do it. And I've always liked hiking, but now I have the energy again to do it. So I've lost like 55 pounds. Oh, wow. But it's been a year and a half. I mean, it wasn't a fad, but her philosophy is every food fits. And so, these keto or Whole30 or whatever, I tried all of those things. And it doesn't last. And then you go back to eating normal, and then you get it all back. Where this is, you can have pizza if you want, but this is your calorie budget, and you decide how you want to use it. Right. Now, is it good to eat that every day? No. But it's really just kind of changed my mindset, and I just feel so much better. You just have way more energy to face your life. And I have a hard life. I have a busy life. And so it feels good to feel good. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. A lot of, and it's not really people's fault. I think it's the industry's fault, and there's so much information out there that it's really complicated, the process of
being healthy and living a healthy lifestyle. And it's hard with, the amount of calories food that's just easy and accessible is. So that becomes its own set of challenges.
Yep.
But I think it's like, it really is more simple than people think.
Yep. For me, it's been calories in, calories out. I have to have at least 100 grams of protein a day. And I mean, I still have my diet soda and I have chocolate almost every day, but I have like a plan, and then I decide, is it really worth it or not? And it's been good. It's rubbed off on my husband. Like, he hasn't been as strict, but he has lost too, you know? But I just feel so much better, and I owe so much to her and I still meet with her every week on Zoom. It just keeps me going. I'm not quite to my goal, but I'm almost there. And then I live in Queen Creek, which the Sandham Mountains are like 15 minutes away, and I love going over there and doing the trails. I just like being outside.
Yeah. So. The diet soda is a hack for anyone
I can't give it up.
Yeah,
bad.
It's good stuff. The 0-calorie drinks is a must-have.
I know it's terrible for you. But I'm like, you know what? That's my like vice. I don't do other substances, so that's like the thing that keeps me sane.
Well, the nice part, especially if it's carbonated, is it fills you up a little bit, so it's easier not to cheat. At least that's what I found for myself.
Yeah.
And
I like those too now. Those Celsius drinks.
Yes.
We won't talk about how much caffeine I've already had today. So
a little caffeine never hurt. Well,
not promoting that though. It's really not healthy. I just can't give it up. So
yeah, I know. I kept on posting myself with like Celsius and energy drinks, but and then when I was coaching, everyone would always give me a hard time that I was going to kill myself from drinking too many. But thus far, I've been fine, and
everything within reason, right?
Yeah.
Moderation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know what the day limit on caffeine is, but I think it's like 400 is the acceptable rate, which
I don't know.
This might be a little high, but but that's what I think it says online. Just give us some in your fitness journey. Like, give us a couple like tips or hacks or things that have been like, obviously the diet soda, like that's I think a great hack. But what's been some other little tips and hacks? Some free advice.
Yeah, I mean, I think my nutritionist would cringe if I was saying like diet soda's a tip. Sorry, Wendy. But I think this sounds like basic, but like if you mess up, just start out like don't let your whole day go. Because like before I'd be like, oh, I ate pizza. Oh, forget it. I'm just going to eat the crap the rest of the day. Like if you eat something you shouldn't, just next meal, switch it up. I've just learned how to, especially with protein. Protein's hard for women.
Yeah.
And so for me, like I have to have a protein shake every day or I'm not going to get in what I'm supposed to. And I still don't sometimes.
Yeah.
But I've just kind of learned my list of snacks. Have a friend, like my best friend Mary. We did it together.
Oh, nice.
I met her. We did it too. In fact, she started ahead of me and she's lost 100 pounds. Pretty awesome.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so like having someone to keep you motivated when you're not, because there's times that you're not. And then just finding something like fitness wise, finding something you actually like to do. Like I need to be lifting weights. I do not like lifting weights. It's just not my thing.
Yeah.
I need my daughter to show me how. But I like jogging and I like hiking. And so I need to do some strength training. But like finding something that you actually like so it doesn't feel like a burden. And like for me, those are hobbies for me now. Like I have to do something every day or I don't feel good. And so, and then, you know that saying, like if it takes 30 days to make a habit, like that's so true. Like once you've been doing it every day, you're like I have to keep doing it. And then just tracking everything. MyFitnessPal, that app, you'd be surprised like how many things you don't realize, like you put that in your mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're in good shape. You don't need to worry about that. But like it's so easy to be like when you're a mom, be like, oh, my kid's goldfish, like I want some of that or what, and then those all add up. And so, and now for me, I have to really think like, is that really worth it to me? It is. Sometimes I want the dessert, but sometimes I'm like, I don't care,
Yeah.
So, and then sometimes I mess up and I just start over the next day or the next meal.
I think that's one thing that's interesting. Like when I first kind of got into fitness a little bit, I was worried about once you start, you feel like you're committing to some like giant mountain of a change. and like you're never going to be able to eat sweets again, or never going to be able to have, you know, good stuff again, pizza, burgers, whatever your thing is. But once you get started and you feel like, once you get kind of your body gets used to the drill and gets used to what you're doing, you know, having an occasional, you know, I had a little more than usual, or I had a couple pizza slices or whatever, like you can get right back on track. Like your body's not gonna, it's the repetitive usage of doing it, I guess is the better way to say it.
That's when it catches up to you, and one day you're 50 pounds overweight and you're like, this was not who I was. Like, you know what I mean? And so, but what I've found, the reason I've been successful is I can eat those things if I really want to.
Yeah.
But I have to choose my calories for the day. If I want to eat 3 pieces of pizza, well, that's like a big bulk of what I get for the day.
Yeah.
So if I don't really want to eat much, like just if a protein shake and an apple is the rest of my day, that might be all I have left.
Right.
So, you know, but like I said, her philosophy is every food fits. And in sharing my fitness journey, I've had so many other medical moms get on board, because a lot of us don't take care of ourselves because we have hard lives and we're last. All moms feel that way. And then add in having a child with high needs, you really don't have time for yourself. I think just being real, and I'm not perfect by any means, but like I'm in my 40s, I feel good. I can run around in my neighborhood. Like that's a pretty good feeling.
Yeah.
So
one thing that, like, in just hanging out with your family and getting to know you guys a little bit more, one thing that I really admire was, admire, not in the past tense, I still admire it.
Okay, good.
Is the fact that, because I've met people who have, you know, difficult circumstances, you know, are busy, have, you know, a child who has special needs, and they're almost like they don't have a good system in place, maybe is the best way to put it. And so that kind of controls their life. And one thing I thought that was really cool is the fact that you guys kind of have a system, you know what you're doing, you have some, you know, nurses that come and help.
Yeah.
And you guys just have a really solid system. Okay, we're going to still live life. We're still going to, you know, participate and be active in our lives and engaged and kind of take control of, you know, our situation rather than letting our situation take control of us.
It's true.
And how, like, I just think that's really cool. And was that something that took time to kind of figure out and put the pieces together, or did you guys kind of have a game plan from day one?
Oh, no. It took time. And, you know, to be candid, in the beginning, you know, it was really hard for people to deal with. Like, either we had people that really rallied around us and stayed with us, or we've lost friends because they don't know how to handle Brooke's needs, or they don't know what to say. Or as our kids got bigger and they were taking their kids to the rock wall or going on a vacation and it was just too complicated to take Brooke, we've been left behind. And so, and that's okay. Like, I'm in a place now where I can be like, it's their loss, you know, but it hurt. It hurt at the time.
Yeah.
It still hurts. I'll be honest about it. But, you know, I don't want my other kids to not have happy memories. And there's still stuff I feel guilty about. Like, we can't really fly anymore across the country. Mm-hmm. And so we've made it a priority for if our kids have an opportunity through school to go on a school trip somewhere we can't really go as a family. Like, I want them to have those experiences. Not to be sad, but someday I can do those things when I don't have Brooke. But now we have her, and I want, you know, to make that time. But it certainly takes a lot of time. And I have to say, we have help. So if I did not have her amazing nurses to help me, I couldn't work. We couldn't do a lot of things that we do. But, you know, I don't want to be – a lot of families – and I get it. They're depressed. They don't go anywhere. It's not fair. Like, it's not fair, you know, that your child has this life-threatening condition, and it's easy to just not do the things like you said that other families do. And we don't do quite everything, but I don't want to live that way. And I don't want to be unhappy because of her circumstance. I mean, there's things that aren't fun about it, but generally, you know, I'm happy with our life. And so thank you for that, because we're a work in progress, but it took a long time. And also, you know, just getting confidence to care for such a complicated kid.
Yeah.
You know, for a long time, we really didn't go on vacation for years. I mean, we go to our family cabin, which is still fun, but like to go on a trip, it took quite a long time. But I remember in 2020, everyone was feeling stir crazy, and I was like, we need to go on a vacation, like a real vacation. I'm sick of, like, I love the cabin, great, but I want to go on a vacation, you know, a different vacation. And so the world was closed, but national parks were becoming like a big thing. And so I'm like, we have all the stuff we need. I'll map out the children's hospitals along the way. And we did it. And we did a 2-week trip. I think my kids would probably agree with me. It's one of the best memories we've ever had as a family. And we went up through Utah, Idaho, saw Yellowstone. It was the most beautiful place on the earth.
Yeah.
And it gave us the confidence. In fact, we need to plan another road trip. It's been a couple of years. But ever since doing that, it gave us the courage to be like, we can do normal things. And I remember, I'll share this without being emotional, but I remember being at Yellowstone, and have you ever been there before?
Yeah.
Well, they have those two beautiful waterfalls.
Mm-hmm.
I remember standing as a family, all of us, on the cliff looking at it and just having such a spiritual experience. Like, we're at one of those beautiful places in the world, and we're all together. And long after Brooke's gone, like, I'll always have that memory.
Yeah.
And so I want that for my family. And so ever since then, like, Brooke and my kids have seen Mount Rushmore. We've done trips. I mean, we've been in the middle of Wyoming, and I'm administering rescue meds on the freeway for her, but we're there as a family. And so we have, we don't do as much as I would like, but we're trying really hard. In fact, now I'm like, we need to plan another road trip. But anyway, it took a long time to get there, though, because it's hard. It's a lot of work to take her on a vacation. But it's worth it.
Yeah. And that was just the one thing, like, and you said it at the very beginning. Sometimes I think you think about that. Like, am I going to have a circumstance in my life like this where, where I thought my life would be is completely turned upside down from what I expected. And seeing that, I think for me and hopefully people who watch this, but people who you've talked to in all the work you're doing, hopefully they see it and go, wow, like, okay, that you can still enjoy life and move forward and live and not be controlled by the circumstances of, that you didn't expect.
It's a choice you have to make every day. And I mean, everyone has a challenge that defines you, right? Like, the refiner's fire hits all of us, right? And whether it's, someone who has a really hard divorce, or someone who has a child like mine, or a family, or your husband loses his job and you financially have to live off food storage for a year, or, big things. And not to be cheesy, but you do have to choose to be happy or not. And there's days that I'm not happy about our circumstance, but I don't want my other kids to feel like they didn't have quote unquote normal childhood. And we've tried really hard. We're not perfect, but to do the fun things. And also, I don't want to sit at home. I want to make memories too. So it's been a journey for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, Brittany, this has been a lot of fun. I know my eyes have been open to just epilepsy, what that entails, the work you're doing. And it's always fun learning about, people's circumstances, and especially, about special needs circumstances, because I think there's so much of a need out there for helping people who are in those situations, but also just educating people who aren't, because they're not experiencing that day to day, but they need to know what it's like and how to interact with it. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing about your experiences. I know it's been cool to see it firsthand, getting to know you better, but also hearing about it here today. So I appreciate you coming on, and we'll do something again another time for sure.
Sounds good. It was an honor to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.